We are super excited to be joined by the faculty and staff of Truett Seminary here at Baylor University in Waco. They bring a wealth of rich knowledge surrounding the scriptures, and we are so excited that they will be showing us some beautiful new meanings to some scriptures that maybe we've taken out of context. Not only will we be looking at those scriptures, but at the end of each week we will be talking about the Interpretive Journey, which is how we can read the Bible more clearly, more effectively, and understand their time and our time. So stick around as we bring these thoughts together to address common scriptures that are taken out of context. Thank you guys for joining us on another episode of Southern Soul Chats. We are so excited for you to be here. We have another amazing guest from Truett Seminary here at Baylor University in Waco. I am so pleased to introduce you to Dr. Tucker. Thank you, Dr. Tucker, for being here.
It's good to be with you today. Thank you.
You want to tell our listeners a little bit about what you do here and who you are? Sure. Great.
Yeah, I teach at Truett Seminary. I've been here for 23 years. I teach Old Testament and Hebrew, and do a little administration on the side. My main areas of research, Book of Psalms, and then also the prophets. And that's where we may go today.
I love it. So I had the opportunity through a Zoom meeting to hear you speak on the prophets. It was amazing. I enjoyed it so much. So this is an extra special treat for me to be able to be here, actually not on a Zoom call,
that's good.
but in person. Again, we are in our series of Out of Context. So we're talking about how Scripture can sometimes be misinterpreted, be misread, even misquoted. And so we are just trucking along with another week. We are going to have a focus area for the interpretive journey today on step 3, which we'll get to a little later. But I'm really excited to have Dr. Tucker talk with us about that as well, because he is a very, very well equipped to do that. And we'll save that story for later.
Okay,
So, Dr. Tucker, you are taking us to Malachi.
Yes.
And as we were talking a little bit earlier, Malachi may not be a place where a lot of people hang out.
Probably not for most people. They may know it's the last book in the Old Testament.
Right.
But beyond that, they probably haven't spent a whole lot of time. I usually ask my students how many of them have heard a sermon on Malachi. Very few hands go up. And I ask how many of them have read Malachi lately, and very few hands go up.
So it's not like the go-to chapter, you don't think?
Tends to not be the go-to book in the Old Testament. And I think for multiple reasons, probably. There's a lot of language about priests in the book of Malachi, so most of us don't know really what to do with that. And then also, it's in a sort of a interesting period of history, the Persian period of history, where ancient Israel is under the thumb of the Persians. And so there's some questions that a lot of people have about that as well.
Right. So I just came out of Old Testament survey, as we were talking about, and I found Malachi to be a very interesting book, and especially the end chapter and how it sets up what's coming in the New Testament, New Covenant with Jesus. And so I think it's there on purpose.
Well, it's certainly, you can tell in the Protestant canon, the way we have it set up. It shows up as the last book in the Protestant canon, and it talks about the coming of Elijah and Moses, and you flip the page over and we're at Matthew, and lo and behold, John the Baptist looks a lot like Elijah. So it's for sure the Protestants set it up so that we would make the connection that the last thing we hear in the Old Testament is the coming of a Messiah and the signs of the coming of the Messiah. And then when we flip the page and start the Gospels, we're just hearing the echoes of those texts for us.
Malachi has a really great book. I think we probably shouldn't be so quick to just skip over it.
I think we tend to, in the Old Testament, we kind of have our favorites, right? Psalms, Isaiah, maybe Jeremiah, I don't know, and then maybe Genesis. But we kind of land in our canon within the canon. And it seems like Malachi, unfortunately, doesn't make the top 10 list or so, unfortunately. But I think there's a lot in Malachi for us in an age. I talk about Malachi as speaking to an age of despair. And I think in our own culture, this is where maybe Malachi has something to say to us in our own culture of despair.
Yeah, I love that. So let's get into it. Tell us where we're landing in Malachi today.
All right. We're going to be in Malachi 3, 6 through 12, which is the fifth disputation talking about tithing, of all things.
Oh, tithing.
Yeah.
I think people may have just turned everything off.
They may have.
That's the subject that in church, when the pastor gets up and he starts, everybody starts getting really uncomfortable.
Yeah, and in fact, usually that's the subject most pastors call me and say, would you come preach that sermon for me?
Because I'm going to be on vacation.
That's right. I don't want to preach that sermon, so you can take the heat for us.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, today we're not going to do that. You know what? Because I think that tithing is a very important part of what we do and in the church and just our personal lives. And I know for me personally, I've grown in that area, and I have seen I've seen the beauty of God in tithing. And so I think this is a great topic to look at some of those misinterpretations and what we maybe pick up culturally that's not biblical.
Yeah, I think that's what makes us so uncomfortable is actually not the biblical text. It's those cultural layers that we've placed on top of it that make us nervous. And for example, I think a lot of people read Malachi 3 and they're thinking prosperity gospel. If you give, you're going to get something back.
Right.
Because our society is so transactional. We assume that must be what God's talking about here. But I actually think there's something more at work going on here. I think the other issue in this text that makes people nervous is this idea of robbing God. I mean, these are the kinds of questions I tend to get when I talk to people about it. But I think you're right. I think this text makes us nervous because we're afraid we're going to promise something we can't deliver. That if I preach this text,
right,
and it says something about you're going to get a blessing,
right.
What if you don't get a blessing?
Right.
Have I somehow led you astray in reading the text or your own spiritual life?
Yeah, and these days people turn it around on the church that, well, you're just asking for money, so you used a blessing to coerce me to give you money, but then I didn't get that blessing, so now I'm not giving you any more money.
This is the transactions that are at work. Right?
And now I have a bad taste of the thought of tithing in general now. Yeah. So now I'm never going to tithe again. I'm not going to trust a church with my money. Yeah. And why does Jesus need it anyway? If he's so all-powerful, why does he need my money anyway?
Those are the questions I get.
Well, good. I'm glad you're here today because you can start answering them.
Right. Yeah, but that's what people think, right? I mean, they do think. Your last point in particular, if God is God, why does God need our money? And what is He buying with our money? And I think there's something there for us that's deeper than the transactions we're thinking of in our own culture.
Yeah. So let's get into that scripture. I know they're going to put it up on our screen,
great.
So they're going to have it there. So why don't we walk through how we see this misquoted? Like, let's really dig into that and see the misinterpretation and how believers and non-believers walk away with that weird taste in their mouth when it comes to this scripture.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, there are a couple of verses in particular you can think of. I mean, the verse that always gets quoted that I think gets misunderstood so much is where he says in verse 10, bring the full tithe into the storehouse, and so that there may be food in the house. Put me to the test. See if I'll not open the windows of heaven for you and pour down for you an overflowing blessing. So I think that verse, most people will take it as, if I give, the windows of heaven should open up.
Right.
And I've actually been in, my father was a pastor my whole life. I can remember we had stewardship Sundays back when we used to have those. Everybody would bring their stewardship card and what they were going to tithe for the year or pledge for the year. And someone would always get up and they would give their testimony. It would be something like, I tithed last week, and this week I got like a rebate check from Firestone for my tires.
Yeah, for the exact amount that I tithed. Yeah,
right. And you're just like, so really, this is just a good investment strategy. I mean, that's what the message we're sending is, if you just invest in God, God will pay you back, and it'll be worth your money and worth your time, which it's always cast as a very individualistic thing. I give, I should get something back. And so I think as we'll look in the text a little bit later on, that's one of the real problems we have with the text as far as our current interpretation. I actually don't think it's individual. I think it's communal. It's about the whole community being blessed. Yeah,
I agree with you. We were talking earlier about how the United States is so individualistic.
Yeah, right.
We don't look in the context of the readers and the writers when community was so important. Mm. When you travel out of this country, you see a different way of living. I recently visited Thailand, and they're very community oriented. Mm. They depend on each other. they move through their day with each other. Where here in the States, it's like, it's me and only me, and get out of my way.
Yeah. No, precisely. Yeah, no, I think I always tell my students, there's no I in Old Testament. You can't spell I in Old Testament with an I. And really, there's no identity in the Old Testament without the community. That we are so connected to the community in the Old Testament that's where they find their identity. I had a professor in seminary. He used to always say, we are being saved in community, meaning that God is shaping us always in community. It's never just an individual thing. It's the role of the community that shapes us. And so I think you're right. We read these texts and we over-individualize them, and I think that leads us in some bad ways in thinking about the text.
Well, we also live in a very culture that's we like black or white.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's, what did God say? What am I supposed to do so that God's happy with me?
Right.
I don't want him to be upset with me, because if he's upset with me, then he's not going to pour out blessings, and he's not going to help me through my days, right? I believe retribution.
Yes, right.
The thought of retribution theology. And so if we go back, it's like, okay, that's not exactly what's happening here, folks.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, it's not exactly what he's doing. We're painting a portrait again in community, in a very different culture than what we live in, but this message still very much is a part of our today culture. Now, clearly, people see it at church and the tithe. Bring your tithe. We're going to I know our church service has always that one moment where they say, okay, here's where the boxes are. You can give online. There's the thing on the screen. Right. Don't forget to tithe. And there's a lot of people who are uncomfortable with that. A lot of visitors. Why do you always talk about money?
Yeah, right.
Why do I have to give 10%? What if I can't give 10%? Like, if I give 1%, do I get like 1% of God?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's partly because we treat the tithe like club membership almost, is that if you're going to be a part of this community, then this is what you're supposed to pay.
Right.
And I think people end up feeling guilty if they can't pay their 10% or give their 10%. And then I think ministers and others feel guilty asking people. We don't want people. I mean, it gets into this whole kind of dysfunctional cycle of talking about the tithe that we have here. And so I think what we have to ask, and we'll talk about it a little later on, is this image of the tithe here in Malachi. It's really casting a vision for us more than telling us what's our requirement. I think we hear the tithe as a requirement. I think that's probably out of our westernized mindset. In Malachi, it's interesting, there's 6 these little short pericopes, these little short story insets. And the last 3 are all future-oriented. This is what it would look like if our community lived properly in the eyes of God. This is what it would look like. And so I actually think this text in Malachi is not saying you guys are missing your payments, so get the payments in. It's saying, imagine what would happen if we as a community became the people of God. And it offers a different vision for us. And so I'll maybe say more about that later on. But I think that's one way to move from requirement to maybe like mission statement, vision statement. I mean, it does something different for us if we can read it less about requirement and dues to more of participating in something that God's already starting.
So it makes me think about legalism. Are we treating tithe like legalism, that it's just a part? Again, like you said, it's a club membership, but if I don't pay my dues, if I don't follow the law, I mean, the Old Testament was all about law. Coming out of this course, you just see law after law after do this and do that, and then you see all the failures of the do thises and the do that. But I think now, even in this society that we live in, it's we don't like to be told what we have to do.
Yeah.
So you're giving me a law, and I have to follow this, and if I don't, what happens? And I think that's where a lot of people, they miss the mark.
Right. I agree. I mean, I think when we talk about the law, I tend to tell my students, the law is not something you're obligated to do. It's something you are invited to become.
That's good.
And that because you don't become the people of God by keeping the law in the Old Testament. If you just think about the flow of the Old Testament, it's Abraham who gets called to be the people of God, and a nation is made. The law is not given until Exodus 19. I mean, we got a book and a half to go before we ever get to the law. And the law is given, and this is God saying, as my people, here's what I want you to look like. And so it gives us a picture. And so the laws are not obligations, as, like I said, much as invitations. And the illustration I use with my students a lot is I have 3 daughters, and I will, when they were growing up, when they all got 16, we were able to drive. We had these little conversations about, in the Tucker household, here are the things that responsibilities we take on in the car as a Tucker, or as a teenager as a Tucker. And said, I'm asking you to participate in our family's identity. I'm telling you what you can and can't do. I'm saying, I want you to be a part of our family and live like part of our family. And so I think that's what the law is doing. It's just, I think, probably because we read a lot of Paul in the New Testament and we hear about law in a really negative way, we get to the Old Testament, we just don't know quite what to do with it. And so, again, I think what Malachi is going to do is not give us a law about tithing, but an invitation.
Well, and you talked about it being more community-oriented, and you just brought up Paul, because I was thinking while you said that, it shows a portrait on this side, before we get into the New Testament, of what Paul's going to show us with the support that he gets from community.
Yeah, right.
It's not just one person who supports him. It's multiple churches. Right. It's them pulling together, even in some of the poorest of the regions, and theirs being the greatest of what was given, and not out of obligation or law. Right. It was out of relationship and wanting to support what he was doing and believing in the spreading of the word. And so Malachi's setting us up for that too, a little bit.
I mean, I always tell churches, if they're nervous about Malachi, go read the beginning of Acts, where you're told to sell everything and give everything away. But it's not because that's a requirement. It's because they're part of a community.
So tell me this. If you had to, in your most simplest way, explain to our listeners this verse and what we're missing, what are we mostly missing here? Where are we taking our cultural identity now and putting it on this verse that we're missing the rich vibe of the message?
Yeah, and what I might do to get to that question is back up a little bit to verse 6, if I could.
Please do.
And set us up, because a lot of times when we preach the text or hear someone teach it, they'll start in verse 8. Will anyone rob God? And we go in that direction. I actually think it begins in verse 6, where God says, I, the Lord, do not change. Therefore, you children of Jacob, you have not perished. God's saying, I'm still true to the covenant. You've not disappeared. And he says, and this is the key verse, he says, ever since the days of your ancestors, you've turned aside from my statutes and not kept them. And then he says, return to me so that I may return to you. And the people ask, how shall we return? And so I actually think this whole conversation about tithing is the answer to the question, how do we return? And so, in other words, tithing is not an obligation. It's an invitation to return back to God. I mean, we use that language sometimes, we're going to give back to God what is already God's. We use that language. And I mean, I agree with all of that. But as I started studying Malachi many years ago and thinking about this verse, when I give my tithe, I don't think of it as I'm giving back to God what's God's. I know that. But I actually see it as participating in an invitation to come back to God. It's me returning back to God. Not only returning what is God's, but also myself as an act of homecoming, coming back to God. Because it really makes no rational sense to give up what's yours, that you think is yours, that you earned.
Right.
But we do it because we long for something greater, and that is to be connected with God. So I think this is one of the critical points, is to recognize it's an invitation to come back to God. The other piece that's important that helps us maybe override our traditional reading of this text, he says in verse 8, will you rob God? And then he talks about, he says, you're robbing in your tithes and your offerings, you're cursed with a curse, you're all robbing me, the whole nation of you. And then he says, bring the full tithe into the storehouse so that there might be food in my house, which most of my students will ask the question, why does God need food?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, are we feeding ancestor worship? Are we feeding our gods or something of this sort? And I always tell students, you have to remember that the temple was somewhere between church and county courthouse. I mean, you had social services coming out of the temple, you had worship coming out. And so the food was really there for the larger community, which then helps us understand what the full tithe is. I don't know about you, I've heard sermons where people will preach, you got to bring the full tithe. You can't bring the half tithe.
Right.
3% won't work. 7%, it's got to be 10%.
Right.
If we go back to Deuteronomy 14, the full tithe is the tithe that's taken every 3 years to feed the poor, the widows, and the orphans, and the sojourner immigrants among them. And so it's really a call to give, to care for the community.
Right.
And so here I think this is, again, back to this communal identity, to bring the full tithe, not so God gets anything, but through this, God's people are blessed. And so I think for us to understand the text properly in its context, historical context anyway, is to recognize there's this invitation here to a full tithe, and there's a reason why they're asking for the tithe. This kind of goes back to history. So the Persian period started in 539, and we had a few kings. Some of them we've heard of before: Cyrus the king, and Cambyses and Darius. And then around the 480s, Xerxes comes in, and he's, of the four so far, he's the worst one. The other three kings, what they all did is they would pay you to run the temple. So they would send money to Jerusalem to run the temple because that's where they took taxes in. Xerxes comes into power and says, why am I paying you to run a place that's supposed to give me money? And so he cuts off all government funding and says, your taxation rate is still the same, 60 to 70% was the average taxation rate in the ancient world, and we're not giving you money. And so suddenly the coffers and everything run dry at the temple, the food. We're also, historically, this is in the middle of a great drought that's going on in ancient Israel. So the land is destitute as well. So all of these factors are coming together that really are for the poor and the most vulnerable in their community. It's pretty dire for them. And so this is the call to the full tithe, to bring back into the house so that the community doesn't go without.
So in a modern context, that makes complete sense to me, right? I see it and I'm go, oh, yeah, totally. That's what it says. But if we look in our churches every Sunday, the full tithe is 10%. And it's still bring your full tithe, give, be a part, and they give all the reasons why, and in their little snippet, they're quick. They try to get up there as fast as they can and get off as fast as they can. So when it's presented in this way, how can the church do better to explain this in a way that it doesn't feel like it's the club membership? Because it feels like, is there a breakdown in the Western belief and the way we've westernized the Bible to say that the 10%, surely, like I know I can use my church, for example, it goes to programs, it goes to help people in the community. Now, do I ever see the spreadsheet of that? No. When I give, do I have to do it in the trust that I'm doing what God asked of me to be a part of that in the community? Yes. There's a lot of people who get hung up on that. Well, I want to know where it goes, who it goes, and what you're doing. And a lot of times you don't get those answers. You don't. So if we look at it from this point of view as it being a community, an invitation to be a part of what God's asked us to do, which is love God first and love others, because that's what I'm hearing. When we are part of community, we love those who are less fortunate. We help those who don't have the food, the means, whatever that looks like. And it sounds like same thing here.
Right. No, exactly. I mean, this is to your point, it's loving God, loving the neighbor through the giving. I think the interesting thing about is, now my translation, when we get to, this is where we start getting nervous in verse 10, I said, where it says, see if I won't open the windows of heaven for you and pour down the overflowing blessing. It's a really interesting phrase, that overflowing blessing, which I actually don't translate it that way, and some other English translations don't translate it that way. The way I've translated the verse, it reads something like, pour out for you blessings until there's no more need. There's the word enough in Hebrew there, until there's enough, meaning there's no more need. We read overflowing blessings, meaning if I give, I should get overflowing blessings.
It doesn't matter if I have enough or not. Just keep bringing the blessings.
And I think the claim here is we give so that there's no need among us.
Right.
And so there's enough for everyone. So that our giving is always other focus, not for ourselves.
Right. But we have that me, I.
Yeah.
It's all about me.
And I think you're right. I mean, I think people get nervous about church budgets and they wonder where money goes. And I always tell people, I think those are reasonable questions to ask. Are we spending our money in ways that we think glorify God, serve our neighbor, demonstrate a love for God, demonstrate a love for neighbor? So those are never wrong questions to ask. But I think if our only reason to give the tithe is to support the budget, then we've really not given our people a big vision. It's got to be a little bigger than that, which is, I think, what Malachi is inviting us to think about here.
So you talked about prosperity gospel, and I mean, what a great time. You brought it up, so I know I opened through the door.
Okay.
You know, I think in the last 10 years, maybe even longer, a lot of churches get a bad rep for prosperity gospel. We see more mega churches now.
Yeah.
We see with social media and more means to be able to see people's personal business, we see some lavish lifestyle. We automatically assume that the tithe must be out there affording all these things. I mean, it's nothing to do with the fact they have a job as well and get a paycheck. Yeah. But prosperity gospel is a real thing. Yeah. It's out there.
Right.
And I know I'm not exactly sure where in Scripture, but I know there's a verse that a lot of people will say, well, you know, prosperity gospel may not be a horrible thing because it is a form of the gospel, and maybe it gets somebody in the door. Mm-hmm. It gets somebody in the door, and then maybe from there they learn more and they grow. Right. But I think a lot of people, though, get in the door, and that's where they stay. Yeah. Because, again, we are individualistic, and we do want more.
I think that's right. And I think, you know, to be honest, a lot of people who I don't want to say fall for that, but who are attracted to that, maybe we might say, I think it is partly because we are in this age of despair. And so if you're trying to find a way out of despair, you're looking for a formula that gets you there. And I think prosperity gospel offers that formula, that if I do these good things, God's going to make my life better. My life isn't great right now, so I want to get there, so I'll do whatever I think God asks of me. And I think there are plenty of examples, like you say, of churches maybe falling prey to some of those things. My dad, as I said, was a pastor. The church, my dad always pastored small churches. He did a lot of church starts, and that was what he felt called to do. But in one of the churches where he pastored, up the road about 3 miles, a congregation had built a new sanctuary. And so it was a $36 million sanctuary. They had imported the outside was pink marble from Spain that had been brought in. And they had, on the inside, they had bowling alleys, but also they had, you know, a stage that moved up and down for the piano and so forth. So it was very lavish. The thing was, right down the road, 1.5 miles, there was a center for abused women and children that every year they barely made it financially. And you always think, you know, maybe if they had had a vision like Malachi is calling them to have, that maybe some of those people who drove past that abused women and children shelter would have said somewhere along the way, you know, maybe we don't need Spain's pink granite on the outside of the church.
Right.
Maybe red brick will be okay. You know, maybe let's build something for this center down here. But they never did. And I think it's partly you mentioned the word lavish. I do think our culture, it inculcates in us this love of lavishness because we assume that means status. And I just think when we get to a text like Malachi that's talking about caring for the poor, the widows, the orphans, and the migrants and immigrants among us, and that's why you're going to give the full tithe. It reorients our thinking about those things.
So our last season, we talked about driven to distraction, and money was one of those. And as I developed through that season personally, God just kept impressing on me that, you know, idols don't have to be golden statues and things we burn incense to or bring flowers. Like, again, I said I visited Thailand, so I got immersed in actual worship of Baal. And it was something that, I'm from the South.
Yeah.
I've never seen that before.
Right.
I mean, these people have flowers and food and there's guards there. I mean, this is a very precious, sacred time to this culture. And by the time I left, I was like, oh, that's enough of that. Like that was a lot. But what God started developing in me was showing me that, yes, that is still to this day in many places, that's what idols are. But things like money are idols. Yeah, and so I think I think there's a part of this that when you tell people, this isn't so much just about you saying, let me write my check. Yeah. Let me write my check. They'll leave me alone. I'll go on about my business. God will bless me. Send down the blessings from heaven. But I think it makes us have to look at money as an idol in our life, because if I hear the word community, help, shelter, poor, and I go,
doesn't affect me. So,
my that's not going to help. How does that help me?
Yeah.
What am I getting?
Yeah.
I think that it's a really great red flag of money being an idol in my own life. And how have I elevated that above God and what he's asking? And I think that's why this is so important to look at the context, because to just read it, it does say that.
Right.
It very much says that you give, I have these storehouses, I've got these cows and I can take one at any time and we can make it work. But then when you put words on it, like, no, if we look at the words, if we look at the translation differently, this is what it means. And so I think we have to have a heart check.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I mean, I think we even get the sense of that. I was going to say the heart check. I like that phrase. I think that the next verse reminds us to check our heart or our vision. He gives us this vision where he says, I see if I'll pour down blessings, overflowing blessings, or make sure there's enough for everyone. And then we get to stuff that we think doesn't matter, like locusts and produce and vines, where he says, I'll rebuke the locust for you so that it won't destroy the produce of your soil, and your vine in the field won't be barren anymore. And my guess is most of us just read right over that as though it doesn't matter. Don't forget, they're in a drought, so their vines have been barren. The locusts have been decimating their crops. But there's a symbol here in the prophets. Anytime you talk about nature and creation coming to life again, that's always a flag, a signal, a pointer about the restoration of creation, that God is in the business of restoring things. And so when he says, I'm going to pour down blessings for you, yes, he's going to help their field. Yes, he's going to make sure their vines aren't barren, but it's far more than just you'll have a great harvest next year. That's prosperity gospel. He's saying, no, I'm going to fully restore you, all of creation, if you will trust me. Because he says a little earlier, I dare you, test me to see if I'll do this. Test your heart, test me to see if I'll do these things. And sure enough, if you bring these into the storehouse, you'll see all of creation being restored and turned over. Yeah.
He's so faithful.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's the test. Do you really believe God is faithful? If you do, then give, because God wants to do more than what we're seeing. That's the beginning of this section where he says, return to me so that I may return to you. It seems like an odd phrase. We normally would say, well, God can't be kept out of a room, or what is he talking about there? What he is really saying is the behavior of the Israelites at this time period is such that God hasn't been able to return to them.
And he's also left them, right? Because once these other nations came in, I know there's a particular part earlier on than this where it says that God left them. He removed his blessing from these people because of their ways and how they continued to go to idol worship. And they would always be like, I'm going to do a great job. I'm going to do a great job. I'm going to serve you, Lord. I'm going to serve you, Lord. Oh, no.
Well, I think you're probably talking about Ezekiel, where he gets in the chariot and leaves the temple.
Yes.
He's like, okay, if you're going to worship Tammuz and the other gods, I don't have time for this. And he departs. I think when Israel comes back from exile, I think their hope is, and probably God's as well, that it's going to be a new relationship. Isaiah even speaks that this is going to, we're talking about, the desert blooming and all kinds of beautiful things are going to happen. It's going to be a wonderful when they return. And yet it doesn't happen that way. They still, like you say, worship idols, commit sins, do social injustice, all these sorts of things. And so what God is saying is, if you really want me to come to you, you have to come back to me. And I think for us, sometimes we want to say God has to come to us first.
Right.
And then we'll straighten out our own life. You know, but
we'll see what he gives me first.
Yeah.
And if it looks appealing and charming and it satisfies some needs I have, then maybe I'll get on board with this God thing.
Yeah, right. No, exactly. We want to be convinced first by God. But I think here it's a posture of faith that we're being invited to adopt by returning to God in the assurance that he's going to be faithful to return to us.
And I love that how you talked about restoration.
Yeah.
I mean, who better to look at than the Israelites of restoration? Because time and time and time again, he goes to them and says, I want to restore this. I want to, let's make this right together. Yeah. And continually, here he comes again.
And this is like the whole covenantal promises. If you go all the way back to Deuteronomy, like in 28, 29, and 30, it's the blessings and the curses, which my students really focus on, particularly because there's so many curses. And so they get really hung up on all of that. I have to get them past that part to say there's also a promise of restoration where God says, if you return to me, and then he lists all these ways he'll restore them. And it's really not two prongs in the Old Testament. It's always three. It's blessings, curses, and then this restoration that God's always in the business of giving us one more chance to come back to him.
So I love this. I think this is a great place to move into the interpretive journey because I know there are people going, how did you get that from that?
Yeah, I got it. All right. Good.
Now, we know you got it because you study and you have been doing this for a very long time, and you are well-versed in language and understanding this in a different way than most of us who just pick it up and read it and read it for whatever value is right in front of us. So whichever way we're reading, like if it's NIV or whatever, we just take it at face value.
Right.
And we say, oh, here's the words. And that was the whole meaning of this series, was to say, yes, those are the words and they're on paper, but there's so much more beauty and so much more depth. There's such an invitation to step off into a little deeper of waters to experience who God is and what he's really saying. And so the step we're on this week is step 3, which is crossing the principalizing bridge. And in this step, we're looking for the theological principle. Okay. And I know I'm not telling you anything you don't know because you know this step very well. So using this as the example, this passage, if we've moved through step 1 and step 2 already, and here we are, how would we look at this passage and just any other passage in the Bible? What do I do with this principalizing bridge?
Yeah.
Why is it important?
Sure.
What is it?
Yeah.
And how do I with my limited knowledge, not being a theologian and not studying the Bible in the hours that I know you guys do here, how do I find that? How do I link that together for this step?
Yeah, I mean, I think our tendency sometimes is we get to this step, the principalizing bridge, and we actually make that step number 1, is that we just simply decide devotionally or intuitively what we think this means, and we principalize out of it. And I think in that process, we have these others, crossing the bridge and other things where we're going to try to think about the context. And I think we have to think about literary context, the social context, historical context, because all of those things will give us a picture of what's going on in Malachi, that from there we can then make the connection. What's the takeaway here? What's the theological principle that we have? So, for example, if I simply read this and say, well, I think this is about paying my dues, well, that really isn't the way the temple worked in the ancient world. I mean, these were offerings that you give. And so you have to kind of think about the historical context of offerings and tithes and these kinds of things. And then you think about it in the context of the book of Malachi. I mentioned earlier that what Malachi is doing is he's chastising the community in the first 3 chapters, and then in the first 2 chapters, and then in chapters 3 and following, he gives them 3 visions of what their community could look like. And so I think that's where we start. If we can think about what's the picture being painted by Malachi for that community, then we might ask, what could that mean for us and for our own community?
Yeah, and could you imagine what that really could mean for our community?
Yeah, right.
The struggles here in the States, I mean, let's not talk about other countries,
Sure.
but because we know there's a lot of struggles there, but right here in the States, right here in Houston, or in Houston, where I'm from, here in Waco, in Texas in general, we still have widows. We still have people who are at the Salvation Army looking for food, places, shelter. I mean, if we came together and we really had this mindset of community, and we said, let's look at it from that point of view. Does that really change your heart? Yeah. Does that really show you, do you have a heart for the heart, to the heart that Jesus had? Because that was the heart he had, was that to take care of these people, to love these people. You see it time and time and time again, where he just goes back to widows and those who are less fortunate and taking care of. And we just don't do that great of a job.
No,
as a people. I mean, unfortunately, it is what it is.
It is what it is. Unfortunately, I think that's well said. Yeah, no, I think. I do think if we could think about the principalizing bridge, that maybe the takeaway here isn't simply to care for the widow, orphan, and poor. It's to think about what would it look like to live in a community where there's enough, and enough of all things. So,
and you mean for everybody?
For everybody. And
right.
And I don't mean monetary enough. I mean, so what would it look like? Maybe I'm a person in a church who has more than enough, but inside I'm a desert land. I'm a wasteland because I've worked myself to death. I have no purpose for living except to make my living. And so while on the outside I may look like I've got more than enough, on the inside I'm starving for something else. And so what would it look like to create a community where all of us have those spaces met, whether it's internal, spiritual, or physical, external needs, but somehow we meet all of those needs. And I think that's Malachi's option for us, or what he's proposing for us, that could be possible if we're thinking about what could a community look like. And again, I think it's because most of us in church, I think we like to use the word community in church.
You think? Just a couple of times.
Just a couple of times. And maybe we're a little community.
Right.
But I do a lot of interim pastorates, and I'm always surprised. And I usually do churches, 100, 150, not big churches. And so I'll be there for a few weeks, and I'll pull a deacon aside, and I'll say, so now tell me, who is that person sitting over on the third row? I can't remember their name. And they're like, well, I don't know who that is. How do you not know? I mean, you're a deacon, you've been here forever. How do you not know these people? But they'll say, we have great community at our church. And so I think these texts invite us into a different vision of being community, meeting the needs of all of us, however they may shake out.
So what is your go-to when you're studying Scripture? Like what is some of your favorite places to land to fill in some of the gaps that we miss, that we're not seeing in the text?
Yeah. As far as books to go to?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, so I tend to spend some time in commentaries, obviously, working through the text. There is... But there's so much online now that's actually really helpful. There's also a lot of stuff online that's maybe not so helpful, right? But there's like the Bible Project. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I love the Bible Project.
I always tell my students, if you're reading through, because we read through all of the prophets, a prophet a day, so it's fast and furious. And I always tell them, if you don't think you got what the prophet was about, go watch Bible Project. I'm not trying to promo them.
No, they're great.
But I do think they help provide a resource to help people get a general grasp of all these books. There are other places out there on the website that I encourage people to take a look at as well. But yeah, for me, if I'm really doing a deep dive in a book, I want to grab a commentary that I know will be a good, helpful guide for me. And I think there are a number of commentaries that are out there that I think are very accessible even to like laypersons. You don't have to get technical. I mean, you need something that helps you do these steps that we're talking about here, bridging the divide and then finding the principalizing principle. You'll be able to find some single volume commentaries out there. I could list those, but I think that would be a helpful thing for someone to have on their shelf if they're teaching or just wanting to be a better Bible reader.
So I'm going to ask you a question, and I promise I'm not asking it to be loaded or to start controversy. Yeah. But if there's a listener who says, you know what, I can get on board with this. Mm-hmm. Like I've never heard it this way. Yeah. But I'm really stuck at that 10% thing. I'm really stuck. So if I want to do this, but I need to do it within what I feel I'm led or that I have, that I can start to do this, does it make my offering any less? And I kind of think about the story with the lady and her, some versions say pennies, but I know there's other versions that use a different language than that. So what would you say to them? How could you encourage them to start walking towards that invitation that's being offered to them?
That's good. Yeah, I think the widow's mite, or whatever the word we want to use,
yes.
It's also interesting in the law codes. They make provisions. So you're supposed to bring a ram or something for sacrifice, or one animal for sacrifice, and then it'll come back and say, but if you're poor or if you're vulnerable, bring a pair of doves. You can bring those. And it's not what you bring, it's the spirit with which you bring it. And so I would say to a person, if for them, a certain amount was not possible right now, the goal is not to wait until that's possible. The goal is to be returning back to God. That's that first verse. How do we do that? Is we open ourselves to God's work through us, and we begin with what we can begin with, and we trust God that over time the doors will open in different ways for us. But I think we've almost made the 10% rule so significant it becomes an impairment for most people. I think at last I saw, the average American gave to nonprofits, including churches, I think it's like 2.3% or something. So,
which I believe I read is less than they gave during the Great Depression.
That I think maybe I read something similar as well. So none of that's good news.
No, it's not good news at all.
Yeah,
but it sounds like you're saying it starts with a heart posture.
Yes, correct. I think even in the Old Testament, when it talks about giving of tithes and offering, it's the posture. It's not checking the box. And I think for us, we have to reorient our congregation to talking about giving as a posture of faith, not as this obligation, as we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, so one could even say, if you wanted to make a big stretch here, that overall we have a misconception, not just from a verse in Malachi, but from tithing in general.
I think that's right. Yeah, and it's interesting. We get hung up on the 10% rule. In the ancient Near East, there are other cultures where the 10% rule is also used, and so it's not just only Old Testament, New Testament concept.
Right.
In the ancient world, that was just a normal thing you gave to support your local temple or whatever.
So where did the 10 come from? Why are we so hung up on 10%?
Well, the word that's used there, it's connected to the Hebrew word that means 10. And so we go with that as a tenth and 10%. I suspect it was the idea that you gave your first fruits or whatever, a tenth of it or so. And no one really knows where that began, but that word becomes connected, and it does mean a tenth. But we get hung up on that word, as you're saying. I think we would do well to start preparing people to think about stewardship more than a number, but a posture of opening our lives up to God through our giving.
Right, and letting Him lead that charge of, I think the Almighty God knows what we have and what we can do.
Yeah.
I know for myself, when it came to tithing, I was one of those people who'd be like, I tithe really good here, and then things would change, and I'd fall off for a while, and then come back and tithe really good, and then fall off for a while, because it wasn't, the heart posture was not right. It was that, well, I have to tithe because it's what's required of me, and I want to be in good standing with God, and I want to follow the rules and be a good Christian.
Yeah, right.
I want to have the shirt that says I'm a good Christian, okay, but 10%. But I know over the past couple of years, just some experiences and some ways that my relationship has changed with God and has developed, that it has become a heart posture for me. It's not about what they're going to do with the money. It's not about where it goes. It's that I want to give that back. I want, like you said, I have been guilty of using the language in the past of saying, well, it's His and I'm giving it back to Him.
Yeah.
It's all His. If we look around, it's all His.
No.
And He doesn't need me to give it back. He could take it if He wanted to.
Right.
But I love how you said that, I want to be a part of that invitation. I want to draw nearer to his heart. I want to connect with all the things, all the gifts, all the resources. If that's my money, if that's my time, if that's my ability to be in relationship with people. I love this thought of community because we just don't really have community. We have people in social media.
Right. Yeah.
But we forget or we don't know what church looked like, what church really looked like before it was westernized, and how they moved about and how they took care of each other and how they relied on one another. They lived life together.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I mean, and I think that is the story of the Old Testament. Even in all the failings of the people, you still see these glimpses today in chapel. Our guest preacher, who is a student, preached on 1 Kings 17, and the widow, and when she greets Elisha and brings him in, and she has just a little bit left, just a little bit of flour, a little bit of oil, and yet it's enough to care for the prophet when he comes into the house. And so at that, we see those scenes all throughout the Old Testament. I think we see it in the New Testament with Jesus gathering around the tables with the least and most vulnerable in that community, that they took care of each other. They lived life together. The other thing I think I would say, if I'm talking to people, you ask how would I get them to buy into this, right, about a vision versus a requirement. These latter images of nature, I tend to think of what Malachi is saying is the world is not right now. There's droughts. Our vines are not producing. Our people are hungry. It's not the way it's supposed to be. And so what we might say is it's an invitation to watch God turn the world right side up. And that he will, if we trust him, he will take an upside down world and turn it right side up. And so whenever I've preached on this text, that's one of the lines I use towards the end of my sermons. I talk about that don't give because you have to meet a budget, because eventually that will not sustain your giving. Right. Eventually you will burn out on that. If, however, every Sunday you go to church and you believe the world isn't right side up, and you could some way participate in the righting of the world through God's people, that's a good reason to give every week.
That is a wonderful reason to give every week. And to
say, maybe I want to give even a little more because I really believe God could turn the world right side up, and we live in a world that needs to be turned right side up.
Because we definitely still live in that type of world that needs to be turned right side up. And when you say it like that, what an amazing invitation to us currently to watch God move in ways that maybe we've only read about, maybe we've never seen firsthand in our own lives, but that he can take it and flip it. And you once again see the beauty of community and the hearts of people drawing closer to his heart. That's a beautiful invitation. And
you're right. It still happens if we pay attention. I mean, I'll just give you a quick example from today. Through along a series of events, I became aware of a mother and 3 children who were about to be evicted next Monday. And so we were trying to figure out they live in another city, not in Waco. And so I thought, how am I going to help this person 2 hours or more away find an answer to this? So I called a friend at a church, and I said, can you help this family? Their life, and I said the phrase, is turned upside down right now. And she said, give me a second, let me make a call. And so we have a Zoom call, and there's 3 or 4 of us on a call, and we're like, okay, we'll do this, we can do this. And it's all these churches who are bringing in the full tithe. And they're saying, how do we take one person's upside down world and maybe turn it right side up for them? And I think what we want often is we want the guarantee that if we give, the whole world gets turned right side up like that. And I think we miss the fact that every day we get glimpses of how the world, in individual lives and in families' lives and communities' lives, it's getting turned around, turned right side up through the work of God and his people.
And what's interesting about that, I want to point out, because I know somebody's going to pick up on this, is you didn't have to be in a local church to give a 10% to do that.
Right.
You did that with other churches that had resources, but you brought a community of people together to say, how can we do this? And so I think we have to also be aware that it may not be may not always be that you're giving a 10% to church. I do know that comes with the church territory. And I know my church might get on to me for saying that. I might be in big church trouble. Right. But there are organizations all throughout wherever you live that help people and that, like you said, those like an abuse shelter, that they struggle every single year to meet their budget. But they're a part of turning people's lives upside down the right way, back, putting them back on their feet, putting them back out to the community. And so there's such a rich invitation of seeing that this is so past church walls.
No.
Now, clearly, as church members, we support church and we want to do that. But if you're not even quite there, there still is opportunity. And your story shows that today, that there's opportunity to take what you have, what God's asking you to do, whether it's 10%, 2%, 20%, and be a part of something that He can transform and change lives with. And it's so rich.
That's good. That's good. And I think, hear me careful. I'm not saying don't give to your church.
Neither am I.
I know neither of us are saying that.
Neither one of us are saying that.
But I do think this is the people of God at work in Malachi. Today, it was the people of God at work.
Yeah.
And we were working to do this turning around of someone's life together. And it was because 3 different churches had people who had been giving because they wanted to see the world turn right side up. And they probably won't even know, I doubt most of them will know about what happened to a family today. But they give in the belief that together we, as God's people, are turning the world right side up.
They have taken the invitation to be a part of God's bigger plan.
Right. And I think that you're asking kind of the crossing the principalizing bridge, right? I mean, I think this is what the tithing text of Malachi is about, is the invitation to be part of God's work in the world to turn the world right side up. It's a totally different expectation than the way we tend to treat the text, I think.
It absolutely is, but it's profound, but it's simple.
Right. That's what I think. It feels like it makes sense, and it's not that complicated.
It's really not. Dr. Tucker, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. Thank you for sharing that story with us. I know as people, we like to have something tangible sometimes to hook on to for application, or how do I do this, or what does it look like? And again, Dr. Tucker nor myself are saying, stop tithing to your church. We are not saying that, but we're saying that, or what I'm saying is that if that's a hard place for you to start, there's other places to start. Sure. God's turning the world right side up all around you.
And I can tell you, if I have time, just a quick
story. No, please do, yes.
Another story about how this occurred in a church. This actually happened to one of our students. We have a class we call Interpretive Seminar. It's the last class they take. They all go around and they tell the story of God's call on their life and how they got to seminary. It's again, at the end of their seminary career. So this student begins to share. I first time I'd ever met him. And his story, he said, I grew up in a certain part of Texas. He said, my mother left me when I was 1. My dad owned a bar. He wasn't a Christian. He said, all I remember is as a little kid, I played behind the bar while he ran the bar. And then once midnight hit, he said my dad would go upstairs and his friends, and they would have a party and keep the fun going. So he said he never grew up in a Christian context. And he got into junior high, and one of his friends invited him to lock-in or something like that. He started going to the church, meeting friends at the church. One day he was walking to school, and one of the church members drove by, and it happened to be a cold day, and they're like, man, you need to have a jacket on. It's a little too cold. And he said, well, I've outgrown all my jackets. I don't have a jacket to wear. And so he said 2 days later, he goes out the front door, and there hanging on the front door is a new jacket for him. And he said, I had never had a new piece of clothing in my whole life.
Wow.
And he said, and I know it came from someone in the church. And he said he kept coming. And then about his 9th grade year, he made a profession of faith. And his dad never came, but he kept coming. His junior year in high school, his mother comes back into their life. And 4 months later, she's diagnosed stage 4 pancreatic cancer. They give her 3 months to live. And so what he tells us is he asked his father, we should reconcile. And his father, of course, won't reconcile. she ends up passing away. She's living a couple of hours away, and that's where the funeral is going to be. And so he asked his dad, he said, "Are you going to go with me to the funeral?" And the father said, "Why would I go to her funeral?" And so he said he knew that he was going to drive to the funeral of his mother, and there would be a place where the family's supposed to sit, and he would sit there all by himself on that row. But he was going to go. What he didn't know is the youth minister at his church had gone to the school with the van and checked out all the members of the youth group. They all piled into the van. They beat him down there. And he said, "I walked into the church and I looked up, and where it said family, it was all my youth group." And he said, and when it was time for me to go up to the front and stand at the casket, he said, the thing I dreaded for so long, he said, I had my family with me. They all stood beside me. And so his comment was, he said, the church saved me. Because he said, I thought I didn't have a family. I thought I had no one who cared about me. And someone did. That's how I found Jesus, and that's how I found a family. And so for that one kid, the church turned his world upside down. And I think these are the small things we do in church that we should recognize and participate in, because these are the things where we can say God is really at work in the world.
And he's doing exactly what you said through all things. He's turning the world right side up.
Correct. Yeah, and it's through all of us together. In fact, in this text, one thing we didn't talk about, but in this text, all of the words "you" in here are plural. It's never singular. I'll open the windows for you all. Let's go south here. For y'all, all right? It's all, everything is...
I understand y'all. Thank you.
All right, got it. Yeah. I mean, and so it's never about an individual getting something back when we tithe. It's if y'all will bring the tithe into the storehouse, I will open the windows of blessings for y'all. And so what I've learned to do is, when I give, I don't expect anything for myself. What I look for is the inbreaking of God in my community. This isn't about me. This is not my investment strategy to make Dennis Tucker get more money or anything along those lines. It's my opportunity to see God at work in my larger community. And I can say I see it all the time. And it's not just because I'm giving. I think it's because I belong to a community that believes the world's still upside down and needs to be turned right side up.
And they want to have a hand in helping,
right.
providing the resources for God to do what he does best, which is take the smallest of whatever you have and turn something really big right in front of your face.
Exactly.
Because ultimately in that moment, the glory can only go to him.
Yeah, that's right.
Because not Dr. Tucker and not Miranda Ferguson cannot make those things happen. But we serve a mighty God who is able to do so much more than we can imagine, believe, or even plan.
Right. I mean, the last verse of the chapter says, or that section says, that after this, all the nations will count you blessed because what God has done for you. So, yeah, I mean, it's this idea that it'll be more than we could expect. So it'll be so great that people will say, how did that happen? How did that family's life get turned right side up? Or how did that young guy's life get turned right side up? People want to believe that there's something like that still happening in the world.
They do, and they're desperately looking for it.
I agree.
And this is a good place to start.
Yeah, agreed.
Again, Dr. Tucker, thank you so much. I hope for our listeners that they have found this just rich and inviting. I challenge you this week, guys, to maybe think on this passage a little more. Think about what you think about community. Dr. Tucker just pointed out a really big party. I feel like he saved it for last year. That these are not singular words. These are plural words. It's something that we do together as a community. So I just want to impress on you to search your heart. See what God's telling you about this today. And if you've struggled with tithing or you've struggled with understanding or what a church does, maybe today think in a different way of not what the church is calling you to do, but the invitation that God is giving you to be a part of making our community a true community and loving other people and being able to say that you saw the hand of God at work. What an amazing part of your story to be able to add that I saw God do these things with this little thing over here. All right, guys, so we want you to come back next week to check out our next guest and our next scripture or passage that's taken out of context. We hope that you've enjoyed this. We want to hear from you, your feedback. If you have questions, don't worry, I'm going to send them all to him. I'm not going to answer them. I'm going to send it to the expert. But really, thank you again. We hope you have a great week. Bye, y'all. Hey, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. What an honor it has been to sit with our guests and to hear all of this amazing information and to see the Bible really come alive in new ways. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our podcast. We would love for you to join us in spreading the good news of what God's doing in people's lives and how we can grow deeper in relationship with Him. Now, up next, you're going to see a word from our partner here at Truett Seminary. As a student of the certificate program, I can't tell you how much this program has changed and is developing my spiritual life. So I want you guys to know more about it in case you're interested. So a word from our partner is coming up next. Thank you, guys. Bye, y'all.
Hi, I'm Dr. David Tate with Baylor University's George W. Truett Theological Seminary. If you're looking for something deeper than Sunday school, but not as heavy as a master's degree, then we have the perfect opportunity for you. The Truett Seminary Online Certificate Program bridges the gap, offering formational theological education without the intensity and expense of a degree. Designed for anyone, whether you're a ministry leader, a Bible study teacher, or someone who simply attends church and wants to grow in your faith, this program is for you. Learn to study the deep beauty and truth of the Bible with confidence. Connect to God through prayer and think more theologically about your faith as you become better equipped to apply your faith in ministry and in everyday life. Take the next step in your journey. Truett Seminary Online Certificate Program. Flexible, meaningful, and made for you.